Today we will talk about XLM, XRP, and XDC as it relates to trade finance and what I have been talking about in terms of APFII and how Stellar seems to be at the center of the new financial infrastructure that is commonly referred to as the quantum financial system. And just to remind everybody, in my part 2, I explained how APFII was essentially put together as a pilot for a global cross-border payment platform that was put together by the UN, ClickX and Swift, and IBM as primary governmental and technical infrastructure providers, along with Stellar and XLM. And there are a lot of ties into the UN, into a lot of the tokens and coins I talk about. So for example, we've got XDC here because of its involvement with the UN MLETR, as I have talked about in the past, and you've got XLM because of their involvement with the UNHCR. And today I'll be talking a lot about IBM and how they have worked with Stellar to create the cross-border payment platform of WorldWire, and how the involvement of Stellar and XLM is a lot larger than a lot of people think at this time. Here on the IBM site, we have an article from October of 2021 that is explaining what the WorldWire platform is and how it operates. Here it clearly calls out that the Stellar network uses XLM as a bridge currency, and I have a lot of information on that which will explain a lot of things about XLM itself that have much larger implications. All transactions in the network except in XLM occur in the form of credit issued by anchors, which also relates into what Ripple and Stronghold are in relation to Stellar. And anchors are entities that the network participants trust to hold deposits and issue credits into the Stellar network. The credit issuance implies digital obligates which need to be settled out of band with traditional rails, for example. And the idea is to provide a choice in the network for anchors to issue credits or stablecoins for instant payments. And I will come back to that topic here in a little bit. Here is the Project Aspire and IBM video that is talking about the involvement of IBM in APFII.
There's a tipping point coming, and blockchain, in particular digital currencies, this notion of being able to have a monetary store of value that can move as easily as email, as information can move, is really kind of the next thing. Blockchain changes the dynamic in that you eliminate the need to have intermediaries. You're just dealing with the two end-party actors. It's more point-to-point, so it reduces friction. If you have less stops along the way, you have less cost, less time. Ultimately, that translates into a better overall experience for the sender and for the recipient. Well, IBM WorldWire will be a new type of transactional payment network that enables money to move more seamlessly, more quickly, more cost effectively to anywhere in the world. It is a network at its very core, provides a means for counterparties, that is to say for financial institutions acting on behalf of their beneficiaries, to signal to one another that they want to send money for some reason, and to be able to do all of the due diligence that's required to make sure that the money being sent is not being sent from any nefarious actor, and likewise the recipient is a legitimate entity. The novelty of WorldWire is that payment message instructions and the store of value, the actual money, move together as a sequence set of operations in a single transaction on a single network. That's pretty profound because it's no longer about just making accounting entries. It's also about moving real monetary value in conjunction with those accounting entries. That's never happened before. That's something entirely new.
And here on the APFII site, it has all of that information on Project Aspire and explains the connections into traditional financial institutions that Jesse Lund talked about and how it is called out here in our article out of IBM. Here is where it begins to get interesting for IBM and Stellar. I did have to go back into the Wayback Machine to actually find this one, and it is from October of 2017, and it is an announcement that talks about the creation of WorldWire that involved IBM, Stellar, and ClickX, who has ties into Swift. And if you're interested in that, I explained a lot of those ties in part 2. Here it explains more on the 12 currency corridors as called out on that Project Aspire page. And it also introduces the involvement of IBM Hyperledger Fabric, which also involved ClickX. And it explains that digital assets are issued on the Stellar network as a foreign exchange bridge to allow for near real-time settlement. And ClickX serves as the founding financial institution in that Pacific area. IBM will continue to advance the platform with the goal of expanding capabilities in order to support CBDCs, securities, and structured financial assets, which sounds a lot like all of the examples of how XLM is tied into all of these different kinds of platforms about real-world asset tokenization. Each payment is immutable, and settlement transactions are provided via smart contracts on Hyperledger Fabric. At that time, Stellar will provide the network and digital asset to facilitate the settlement of transactions cleared on Hyper. And if we go back into Tokenizer's post on projects that have ties into the UN, we can also see how all of these projects also tie into Hyperledger as well. You've got things like XDC, ALGO, Quant, HBAR, NXRA, EWT, IOTA, and of course XLM. This is the first time anyone has made blockchain work at an institutionally viable scale. And that comment came from Robert Bell, chairman of APFII and founder of ClickX. And he is the individual who is so heavily tied into all of the content that I have been putting out on this, primarily because he created ClickX that won an award from Swift, as I explained in part 2. And now is a good time to talk more about the history of IBM and in particular WorldWire, because I had always thought that IBM created it and then reached out to XLM. Well, it turns out that IBM reached out to Stellar about having their help for IBM, and I'll explain that here in a bit. So we have seen that the last time that the WorldWire page was updated was in March of 2022. All of these huge companies do not have to tell us anything, and the fact that the global exchange IBM built with Stronghold USD as the main exchange token went from being public and institutional and was launched in 2018 to then exclusively to institutional in April of 2019. And here is a bit more on that. The Protocol 20 upgrade on the Stellar network is also huge, because that has positioned them to be able to do everything that WorldWire and Hyperledger were enabling without having to tie into any external platforms. And here is a bit more on that.
However, unlike its competitors, Stronghold isn't targeted at the general public. Instead, it's aimed at businesses and financial institutions. So, it then goes on to say, in fact, Stronghold has dramatically reduced its support for general users. In April, it barred retail investors from its exchange. So we see that initially they were speaking about cross-border payments, being allowed retail users to be able to utilize the exchange and the power of Stronghold USD. And then a few months later, backtracked, barred retail investors from the exchange, and made it purely for institutions and businesses. So this is very interesting if we then think about the asset manager of Franklin Templeton utilizing Stellar, gaining that approval, and then Stronghold has basically made this their exchange with Stronghold USD exclusively for institutions.
Here are a couple of interesting comments on the creation of IBM WorldWire and the involvement of Stellar and XLM.
Yeah, so WorldWire is obviously pretty exciting. We've had lots of people approach us and mainly IBM about wanting to get on the WorldWire platform. We're super excited to have that become live.
I'm the VP of blockchain, really the solutions portfolio for financial services at IBM, which is really the largest segment of IBM's market, financial services. It represents about $30 billion a year revenue, about 40% of the overall client portfolio. A little bit of just a little bit of a commercial. We'll get it out of the way really quick for my current employer. IBM's the global leader in enterprise blockchain today. We have over 1,500 professionals working across virtually all industries, 400 plus blockchain projects. We have the world's leading enterprise blockchain platform based on open source, governed by the Hyperledger project, differentiated by cloud, and infrastructure offerings like the Z systems and the Q quantum systems, which are coming soon.
So all of that takes us back to how Stellar and XLM are a bridge currency in the Wire platform at that time. In 2019, they rebranded a little bit and they took off the comments about XLM being a bridge asset on their site. It's also interesting that they have on there that their logo has just a hint of Saturn in there, which is a topic that I won't get into on here. However, if you check into that, it has a lot of interesting ties that go back into XRP as well. Here is an article on the consensus protocol itself, and it has a ton of information on here. It is pretty tough to understand. However, I will be explaining that at the end of this series, because it has some extremely interesting points around how the quote-unquote proof of agreement protocol, which is also how the protocol of XRP operates, is important for the institutional adoption of XLM and XRP. However, even in here, it talks about how the network tend to bridge all assets, which then ties into how the Stellar protocol is very uniquely designed because of payments, which are also called pathfinding or path-based payments, and are a feature within the protocol that allows users to send a payment from one asset to another through a specified sequence of intermediate assets, which adds on to how XLM can actually act as a bridge. And that adds on to how XLM was implemented in the APFII pilot as well. Now that Stellar has its own AMMs and its own smart contracts, it is able to conduct all of that bridging and payments internal to its own network without having to have any third-party ties. And here is an image of LPs. I'm still not 100% sure how the values here are as high as they are. However, if you go on Stellar Expert and go to their LP page, it shows that there are trillions in there right now. And I'm trying to understand that more at this point in time. There have been some updates with the Stellar Lobster as well that explain how you are able to exchange different assets such as Bitcoin, Solana, XRP, and ETH from another chain to Stellar for XLM or USDC, which is also showing evidence of how XLM is being implemented and utilized as a bridge asset. Here we begin to get into the trade finance end of things, and in the next video after this, I will expand on some ties into XRP and XDC a bit more. On the IBM site, you have an example of how Banco Santander has worked with IBM and their WeTrade platform that ties back into Stellar and XLM. Here it explains how WeTrade, built on IBM and powered by Hyperledger Fabric Tech, offers banks' customers access to a user-friendly interface by leveraging smart contracts and opens up potential trading opportunities. And it appears as if Stellar using Hyperledger for smart contracts has been replaced in Protocol 20 with their own Soroban contracts, and how worldwide cross-border payments have been replaced with the Stellar protocol and XLM as a bridge asset.
After Bitcoin and after the different cryptocurrency situation, we really understood blockchain as a piece of technology that really changed the infrastructure for banking. When we realized the powerful tool that we had at hand, we did some pilots with corporate clients that work in different regions of the world, and the results are awesome. This is the aha moment in the blockchain space when it comes to applying blockchain for cash management, liquidity management, cash pooling, sweeping and topping of liquidity. The original use cases were moving money in the world. This is how we state it. No matter if it's peer-to-peer or business to business, we're testing the waters. Then once you have this one covered, you can jump into the second one, which is performing smart contracts. An example of this technology applied into reality is the WeTrade consortia. Is one of the consortia that we are pushing forward with IBM as a partner. There's plenty of banks already connected into the platform. Is a vehicle, is a consortia with a vehicle, and we are working in letters of credit using smart contracting from Hyperledger. I think this is a game changer. What I really find most fulfilling in my experience is getting in touch with new companies, with startups, with entrepreneurs, both in incubators and accelerators program.
WeTrade immediately reminded me of the old IBM TradeLens platform, which is shown here, and I have explained it in the past, and I did a video on it. However, it's tied into the IBM as well, and it has a lot of involvement with Stellar and XLM, and it also tied a lot into XDC and R3 Corda and IBM Q that we heard Jesse Lund talk about in that clip. It also ties in WeTrade here, and we just heard a testimonial of how successful it has actually been from Santander. Also have HSBC involved, which is where the chairman of APFII, Robert Bell, came from. Here is an article on WeTrade, and it's from October of 2021, and it does not directly call out Stellar here, although it does talk about the Hyperledger platform, of which we were able to show the involvement of Stellar from the article here. I found an article that predates that, and I had to use the Wayback Machine again because it's from September of 2016 that calls out UBS planned to create a trade finance system using to streamline import-export transactions. And they were working with IBM and Hyperledger, which then further explains how connected that WeTrade actually is and how important it is for Stellar and XLM. Here are the crypto projects associated with Ledger, and I have talked about how XLM, XDC, and even Casper are connected into trade finance. You also have HBAR, Quant, and EWT called out as well. In this post from Tokenizer about the big four platforms of Hyperledger, Quorum, Corda, and BSN, you've got Corda, Hyperledger, and XDC and XLM called out in TradeLens, which also has a lot of comparisons into WeTrade as well. Here is an example that is expanding upon Hyperledger and CBDCs as we have introduced, and how it ties into the Federal Reserve all of the way back in 2016, which was at about the same time that yes announced that they are creating a trade finance platform with IBM Hyperledger.
We actually did work back in 2016 to create a wholesale CBDC, first with Ethereum, then Hyperledger Fabric, because they were the only two platforms that existed outside of the Bitcoin blockchain. But then we pivoted in 2019 and started work in 20 for some major reasons. First of all, China had announced that they will be doing a production pilot of their CBDC, which they started back in 2014. We all know Facebook announced Libra, which changed its name to Diem and then was sold off to Silvergate Bank, which hasn't yet launched anything. JP Morgan has JPM coin, stable coins growing. So these are all important things to have central banks to be thinking about the implications both of these products, but also the potential for a CBDC in and of its own. But most importantly, back in March of 2020, there were two bills that were part of the CARES Act, which was in the US, was our COVID relief bill. And they would have directed the Fed to build a retail CBDC with accounts for citizens. And so when Congress starts to act, now neither of these made the final bill, but when Congress starts to act, it's important that we be ready to react to whatever those laws might be.
Here it also calls out JPM, which is tied into Quorum, as well as Hyperledger, which all ties back into Stellar. And a lot of the trade finance concentration has come out of Australia because of the ties into the trade finance hub of the Pacific area. You have a lot of examples of how Ripple and XRP are involved and how Stellar and XLM are involved, along with R3 Corda and Quorum as well. And Australia is an important tie into APFII because that is the financial hub of the Pacific area. And referring to this IBM article again, it calls out Australia a couple of times, including the National Bank of Australia, which is called out here on our map put together by the XX account. And it's interesting because XLM ties into the Australian digital dollar and ties into Novati. And if you go on their site about the AUDC, it calls out that it operates on Stellar, the XRPL, and ERC20 as well. Here is an announcement about the integration with Stellar, And here is one about the integration with the XR, which is also interesting because it ties into Stronghold in a couple of ways. One, because it is interoperable on the XRPL and on Stellar, and because the chief technology officer and co-founder worked on XRP and XLM and is from New Zealand, just like Robert Bell, who is the chairman of APFII. And here is a bit more from the Novati site, and it calls out RippleNet, Visa, who are connected into XRP and XLM, calls out Stellar as a tech partner, and it also calls out IBM as a tech partner as well. As of November of 2022, TradeLens was actually allegedly canceled, which at about that time was also put out by Maersk as well. So at this point in time, the TradeLens platform does not exist how it originally did. However, it appears as if it has been replaced with WeTrade, much more streamlined fashion. And that could be because IBM WorldWire and Hyperledger are so intertwined with Stellar and XLM.